The night shift at the rehabilitation center was always quiet, punctuated only by the occasional creak of old floors or the distant hum of machinery. My mind often wandered as I walked the empty hallways, but tonight something felt off. I was making my rounds when I noticed a figure in the corner of room 203, a patient I didn't recognize. The room was dimly lit by the flickering fluorescent lights that cast eerie shadows on the walls. I saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, facing the corner. His posture was unnaturally still, almost like a statue. I approached cautiously, curiosity and a bit of unease driving me forward. As I got closer, I could make out his whispering. The soft, unintelligible murmurs blended with the low hum of the air conditioning. I called him, "Hey, are you okay?" But he didn't respond. His head turned away from me, and his whispers grew more urgent. I took a deep breath and reached out to touch his shoulder. The moment my hand made contact, he turned abruptly. His eyes were startlingly vacant, hollow like those of a doll. It was a look that sent a shiver down my spine. His gaze seemed to pierce through me, yet there was no sign of recognition or awareness. It was as if he wasn't fully there. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing unease. The man didn't answer. He just continued to stare, his eyes fixed and unblinking. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead, and an inexplicable sense of dread settled in my chest. I quickly stepped back, trying to regain my composure. "I'm going to get help," I said, turning on my heel and hurrying out of the room. I glanced back once before shutting the door, but he remained still, his eyes following me with an unsettling intensity. The next morning, during the shift change, I recounted the night's events to my colleagues. I described the patient and his peculiar behavior, but no one seemed to know anything about him. "There's no record of a new patient in room 203, said Karen, one of the senior nurses. "Are you sure you saw someone there?" I nodded, trying to convince myself as much as them. I'm sure. He was there. Karen and a few others checked the records and confirmed no new admission. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Had I imagined the whole thing? The certainty of my experience clashed with the evidence, leaving me increasingly unsettled. Determined to find out more, I reviewed the security footage from the night before. I sat in the control room, scrolling through hours of video. The footage from room 203 showed an empty room for the entire night. There were no signs of anyone entering or leaving. My heart raced as I repeated the footage, but the empty room remained constant. I leaned back in my chair, trying to understand everything. The man I had seen was nowhere to be found on the recordings. The reality of the situation started to blur, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. I wasn't sure if I was losing my grip on reality or if something truly inexplicable was happening at the center. As I left the control room and walked the now eerily quiet hallways, I felt like eyes were watching me from the darkness. The sense of being observed grew stronger, and the shadows seemed to move with their own life. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being followed, that the haunting presence from room 203 had somehow seeped into every corner of the building. The empty hallways, the silent rooms, and the cold, distant gaze of the mysterious patient left me with more questions than answers. The sense of unease was overwhelming, and I knew I needed to find out the truth about what I had seen, even if it meant delving into the unknown. Just past midnight, I first noticed him sitting in the corner of room 12. I was making my usual rounds through the rehabilitation center, ensuring everything was as it should be. The room was dimly lit, the harsh overhead lights of the daytime replaced by softer night lights that cast long shadows across the floor. As I walked past, I caught a glimpse of a figure hunched in the far corner, almost blending into the shadows. My first thought was that the patient was simply a new arrival. We had several admissions recently, and with so many faces coming and going, it wasn't unusual for me not to recognize everyone immediately. But something about this man was different. There was a peculiar stillness about him, an unsettling quality that made me pause. I decided to investigate. As I approached the room, I noticed the man wasn't moving. His back was turned to me, but I could hear a faint whispering. The words were too soft to make out, but the tone was eerie and almost rhythmic. It was as if he was engaged in some private, intense conversation with himself. I cleared my throat to announce my presence when I reached the doorway. The whispering stopped abruptly, and the man turned to face me. I froze. His eyes were unnervingly vacant, blank, doll-like eyes that seemed to stare right through me. His gaze had no emotion, just an empty, hollow stare that made my skin crawl. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I expected some kind of response, but the man merely looked at me in silence, his eyes unblinking. "Can I help you with something?" I pressed, but he remained motionless, continuing to stare. It was as if he was completely disconnected from reality, caught in his own world. I took a cautious step forward, but something in the atmosphere made me hesitate. I felt a chill, as though the temperature had dropped suddenly. After a few moments of tense silence, I left the room and reported this to the nursing staff. I turned to go, but as I looked over my shoulder, the man's gaze followed me. His eyes never seemed to move, yet they remained fixed on me, sending a shiver down my spine. The next morning, I asked around about the new patient. I spoke to several colleagues, but none had any information about him. "There's no new patient in room 12, one of the nurses told me, sounding confused. "Are you sure you didn't just imagine it? Room 12 has been empty for weeks." I felt a pang of frustration. I was certain I'd seen someone there. I decided to review the security footage from the night before, hoping the cameras might provide some answers. Sitting in the control room, I watched the previous night's footage playback. The images clearly showed the usual empty hallway and the quiet, unremarkable room. My heart sank as the footage showed room 12 devoid of any activity. The room was empty throughout the entire night. I replayed the segment multiple times, but there was no trace of the man I had seen. The sight of the empty room on the screen contradicted my vivid memories of him being there. Feeling a growing sense of unease, I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe I had been tired or distracted, and my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man's vacant eyes and the eerie atmosphere lingered in my mind, making it hard to focus on anything else. I knew I needed to find out more. If the man was a figment of my imagination, or if there was something more sinister at play, I had to get to the bottom of it. I began to keep a closer watch on room 12, hoping to catch any unusual activity, or perhaps even get another glimpse of the mysterious patient. As the days went on, the unsettling feeling persisted. I couldn't ignore the sense that something, or someone, was watching me. The empty room seemed to hold a secret that I was determined to uncover, no matter how unsettling it might be. The next day, the unease from last night lingered in my mind as I arrived for my shift at the rehabilitation center. The strange encounter with the new patient still felt like a vivid, unsettling dream. I was determined to get to the bottom of it. I started by asking if anyone else had noticed the mysterious individual. I approached several colleagues, trying to sound casual, but their responses were uniformly puzzled. "A new patient?" "No, we haven't had any new admissions recently," said Lisa, the nurse on duty. "Are you sure you saw someone?" I nodded, feeling a twinge of frustration. "I'm positive. He was sitting in the corner of room 12, just whispering to himself." Lisa frowned. "Room 12? That's odd. We've got no one listed for that room right now." Growing more unsettled, I decided to check the security camera footage from last night. The security room was eerily quiet, and the hum of the monitors starkly contrasted with the chaos in my mind. I rewound the footage to the time I had seen the patient. The time-stamped video showed an empty room. There was no whispering, no shadowy figure, just the stark, unyielding emptiness of room 12. My heart raced. I watched the footage several times, hoping for a glitch or a mistake, but each replay confirmed the same thing. The room was vacant. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. The footage seemed to mock my confusion with its sterile, unblemished clarity. I reviewed the footage around the time I entered the room to check the logs. Everything appeared normal. There were no sudden movements or signs of tampering with the cameras, and the room was as vacant as it was before my encounter. I spent the rest of my shift trying to push the incident out of my mind, but it clung to me like a persistent shadow. My work felt different, more strained, as if the very walls of the center were watching me, holding onto a secret. At the end of my shift, I returned to room 12. I entered cautiously, as if the air in the room might betray some hidden presence. The room was as I had left it, sterile and empty. I took a closer look, checking for anything out of place. The furniture was neatly arranged and the bed was unoccupied. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just then I felt a draft, colder than usual, and a shiver ran down my spine. The room felt oppressive, as if it were holding its breath. I moved around, inspecting the corners, but there were no signs of recent activity or disturbance. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I decided to talk to the maintenance staff. Maybe they had noticed something unusual or been working in room 12 without my knowledge. I found Tom, the chief maintenance worker, in the break room. "Hey, Tom," I began, trying to sound casual. "Have you had any reason to be in room 12 recently?" Tom looked up from his coffee, raising an eyebrow. "Room 12? Not that I know of. Why?" "I thought I saw someone in there last night. A new patient, maybe. But according to the records and the footage, there's no one listed for that room." Tom's expression turned serious. "We've had some odd things happen around here before. Old buildings like this can sometimes play tricks on your mind." I nodded, though his words did little to comfort me. The more I investigated, the less clear the situation became. Was I losing my grip on reality, or was there something genuinely supernatural happening? I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as I left the center. The eerie emptiness of room 12 haunted me. I decided that I needed to dig deeper to understand what was happening. Something about the patient and the empty room didn't add up, and I was determined to find out what it all meant. The following morning, I woke up unsettled, haunted by the eerie encounter with the mysterious patient. The image of his hollow, doll-like eyes seemed to follow me, casting a long shadow over my thoughts. Determined to make sense of the night's events, I reviewed the security footage from the night before. The rehabilitation center's security system was state-of-the-art, with cameras in every building corner. I headed to the control room, which had monitors displaying live feeds from each camera. I could already feel the weight of the night pressing down on me, but I had to see for myself if what I remembered was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I started by reviewing the footage from the room where I had seen the patient. The timestamp on the footage matched the time I had seen him, so I fast-forwarded to that part of the recording. The footage showed the room in complete darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of emergency lights. Everything seemed normal initially. Beds in their usual positions, no signs of disturbance. As I continued to watch, I noticed a curious detail. The camera focused on the corner of the room where I had seen the patient. It was empty. There were no unusual movements, no shadows that didn't belong. I replayed the footage several times, convinced I must have missed something, but the result was always the same. The room was unoccupied. My heart sank as I tried to reconcile the footage with my vivid memories of the night. How could the room be empty when I had seen someone sitting in the corner? The more I watched, the more convinced I became that something was wrong. I checked the footage from other cameras around the center, hoping to find additional evidence to explain the discrepancy. Every camera feed showed the usual nighttime activity, or lack thereof. The hallways were empty, and the other rooms were as they should be. It was as if the patient I had seen was a figment of my imagination, but I knew what I had experienced was all too real. Feeling increasingly frustrated and confused, I decided to consult with my colleagues. Maybe someone else had seen something unusual or knew of a recent change in the center that I hadn't been informed about. I contacted several staff members, but no one had any information about a new patient or anything unusual. It was as if the patient had never existed. Later that day, I approached the head nurse, Karen, who had been with the center for years. I hesitated before bringing up the strange encounter. "Karen, did we get a new patient recently? I thought I saw someone last night, but I can't find any record of him." Karen looked at me puzzled. "I don't know of any new patients, and if there had been, it would have shown up on our records. Are you sure you saw someone?" I nodded, trying to suppress my growing anxiety. "I'm positive. I saw him in the corner of the room, and I remember his eyes were different." Karen's face softened with concern. "You might be tired, or maybe it was a trick of the light. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us, especially under stress." Her explanation didn't ease my fears. I was certain of what I had seen, and the fact that the security footage contradicted my experience deepened my dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden, or that there was more to this situation than met the eye. As I returned to my duties, I couldn't help but glance nervously at every shadow and corner, expecting the mysterious patient to appear again. The unease grew with each passing hour, and the haunting image of those empty eyes stayed with me, a constant reminder of the unsettling truth that something was amiss in the rehabilitation center. The night after my unsettling encounter with the new patient, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The patient's hollow gaze haunted me, and I found myself questioning my own sanity. I needed answers. As a night shift worker at the rehabilitation center, my responsibilities extended beyond just keeping an eye on the patients. I had access to security footage, and I decided to review it to find out what had really happened. I arrived at the security room just after midnight. The usual hum of the monitors filled the space as I prepared to sift through hours of footage from the previous night. My fingers fumbled slightly as I navigated the controls, and I felt a growing sense of dread. The first footage I reviewed was from the patient's room. The room had cameras that provided a clear view of every corner. I fast-forwarded through the video, trying to find when I had seen the patient. My heart raced as I watched the footage. The first few hours were uneventful, nothing out of the ordinary. The room was empty, as it should have been. I continued to scan through the hours, becoming increasingly anxious. Where was the patient? Finally, I reached the time when I had seen him. I stopped the playback and watched closely. To my shock, the footage showed an empty room. The camera angles were clear, capturing every detail, but there was no sign of the patient I had encountered. I replayed the segment several times, hoping for some mistake or oversight, but the result was the same. The room was empty. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I felt a rising panic. How could I have seen someone who wasn't there? Was my mind playing tricks on me? The sensation of doubt gnawed at me, but I forced myself to remain focused. I decided to check the other cameras in the vicinity to see if there was any clue I had missed. I scanned the footage of the hallway and common areas around the patient's room. Everything appeared normal, no unusual activity, no unexplained movements. As I continued to review the footage, I noticed something peculiar. The timestamps on the footage seemed to skip occasionally, as if the video was being altered or edited in real time. My heart pounded as I considered the possibility that someone, or something, might be tampering with the footage. I quickly checked the camera feeds to see if there was any sign of tampering. Everything seemed operational, but the growing sense of unease was undeniable. I knew I needed to get to the bottom of this, so I noted reviewing the footage more thoroughly during the day shift when more staff would be present. I left the security room with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. The empty room I had seen on the monitors was now filled with a different kind of darkness. The eerie stillness of the center only heightened my sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just out of sight. As I walked the corridors, every creak of the building and every shadow seemed to carry an ominous weight. I knew that I had to find a way to uncover the truth about the mysterious patient. My next steps would be crucial in unraveling the mystery. The security footage had raised more questions than answers. I couldn't ignore the possibility that there was something beyond mere malfunction or hallucination at play. Determined to find out the truth, I prepared to delve deeper into the center's history and gather more information about the enigmatic presence I had encountered. The answers might lie in the past, and I was resolved to uncover them, no matter where the search might lead. I walked down the dimly lit corridor of the rehabilitation center, my footsteps echoing softly against the linoleum floor. The encounter with the mysterious patient was still fresh in my mind. The blank stare of those doll-like eyes haunted me, and the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I had to find out what was happening. The following night, I decided to do a more thorough investigation of the room where I had seen the patient. I approached it cautiously, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. The room was just as it had been the night before, plain and unremarkable, with a single window and a few pieces of basic furniture. I scanned the area for any signs of disturbance or hidden cameras, but everything seemed normal. I noticed that the window was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and checked outside, but nothing unusual, was just the usual view of the center's quiet grounds. I closed the window and returned to the room, determined to search for clues that might explain the bizarre sighting. I noticed a faint draft coming from a corner near the bed as I examined the room. I pulled aside the curtain and found nothing but an old, dusty air vent. I inspected the vent, but it appeared to be in working order and didn't seem to be the source of the draft. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a soft rustling noise. I froze, listening intently. The sound was faint but persistent, coming from behind the bed. I moved the bed aside and found a small hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, there was nothing but a stack of old medical records. I glanced through them, but they seemed irrelevant, just routine paperwork from years ago. Frustrated, I left the room and checked the security footage again. I made my way to the control room, my mind racing with possibilities. The footage from the night before was still clear. No sign of the patient, just the empty room. I reviewed it several times, hoping to spot something I missed, but the room remained eerily vacant. Something unusual caught my eye as I was about to turn off the monitor. In the lower corner of the screen, the light in the hallway flickered momentarily. It was a brief glitch, but it was enough to make me pause. I rewound the footage and watched closely. For a fraction of a second, the screen showed a shadow moving in the hallway, heading toward the room where I had seen the patient. My heart raced as I considered the implications. The shadow was subtle but unmistakable. It was as if something, or someone, had been moving just out of sight. I rewound the footage repeatedly, trying to make sense of it. The shadow seemed to disappear before it reached the room, but it was clear that something was there. I decided to investigate the hallway where the shadow had appeared. I walked cautiously down the corridor, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. As I approached the area, the air felt colder, and I noticed a slight chill that wasn't present elsewhere in the center. I examined the hallway for any signs of tampering or hidden cameras. Nothing was out of the ordinary, just the usual sterile environment of the center. I checked the ceiling tiles, the light fixtures, and even the floor for any signs of disturbance. Everything seemed normal. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. I quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. The sensation of being watched was stronger than ever. I could almost feel the presence of something unseen, lingering just beyond the edge of my vision. Returning to the control room, I reviewed the footage again, hoping to find additional clues. The shadow remained the only anomaly, but it was enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about the center. The feeling of unease was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the sense that there was more to this mystery than met the eye. With a deep breath, I resolved to continue my investigation. There had to be an explanation for the strange occurrences, and I was determined to uncover it. I knew that the answer might lie hidden in the shadows of the center, waiting to be revealed. After my encounter with the mysterious patient, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next night, as I walked through the dimly lit halls of the rehabilitation center, the unease from the previous shift had only intensified. The sensation of being watched, that prickling at the back of my neck, seemed to follow me wherever I went. The center had always been quiet at night, a place of stillness broken only by the occasional hum of the ventilation system. But tonight was different. The air was heavy, almost palpable with tension. I could feel a cold draft, even though the windows were all shut tight. The temperature in certain areas of the building felt unusually frigid, as if the cold was seeping through the walls. I decided to check on the patient room, partly out of habit and curiosity about the strange occurrences. As I approached the end of the hall, I noticed something odd. The lights flickered intermittently, casting erratic shadows on the walls. It was as if the building itself was reacting to an unseen force. In one of the rooms, I saw that an old rocking chair had started to move independently. The rhythmic creaking of the chair seemed almost deliberate, synchronized with the eerie quiet of the night. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching the chair sway back and forth. I took a few hesitant steps closer, and as I did, the movement of the chair abruptly stopped. The cold draft grew stronger as I continued my rounds. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I approached the room where I had seen the mysterious patient. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, everything seemed in order, but the temperature was noticeably colder. As I stepped inside, my breath misted in the air, the room feeling unsettlingly empty. As I scanned the room with my flashlight, I noticed something strange. The furniture had been rearranged. The bed was pushed against the wall, and the chair was now facing the corner, as though someone had intentionally moved everything. I ran my fingers over the surfaces, searching for signs of recent disturbance. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hallways, making me jump. It sounded like it came from the storage closet down the hall. I raced toward the noise, my flashlight darting across the darkened corridor. The door to the closet was ajar, and as I peered inside, I saw that the shelves had been overturned, their contents scattered across the floor. I heard a faint whispering sound, like a distant conversation. The voice was almost invisible, but it felt like it was coming from behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My heart pounded as I struggled to make sense of the situation. The center's usual tranquility had been replaced by an unsettling atmosphere of chaos and unease. Determined to find some explanation, I took a closer look at the footage from the security cameras in the storage area. The video feed showed nothing unusual: empty rooms and dimly lit corridors. There was no sign of the rocking chair moving, no evidence of the shelves being overturned. It was as if everything I had experienced was a figment of my imagination. But I knew what I had seen and heard. The cold spots, the moving objects, and the eerie whispers were too real to ignore. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I felt as though something was deliberately trying to unsettle me, to make me question my sanity. As I returned to the control room to review the footage again, I couldn't shake the dread that clung to me. The mystery of the patient and the strange occurrences at the center seemed to be part of a larger, more sinister puzzle. I had to discover the truth before whatever haunted the building took things further. The restless atmosphere of the night was a constant reminder that I was not alone, and that something dark was lurking just out of sight. The unsettling events from the previous night had left me on edge. The hollow-eyed patient I had seen was now a haunting memory, compounded by the fact that the security footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. Despite my colleagues' dismissive attitudes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong at the rehabilitation center. Determined to solve this mystery, I stayed vigilant during my shifts. As the days passed, I began to notice a pattern of unusual occurrences that I couldn't easily explain away. One evening, while making my rounds through the dimly lit corridors, I noticed that some objects in the common areas seemed out of place. A chair that was usually pushed against a wall was now in the middle of the room. A stack of magazines was neatly arranged in a corner, despite having been scattered the day before. I shrugged it off at first, attributing it to the disorganized state of the center during the night shifts. But as the nights wore on, these anomalies became more frequent and harder to ignore. One night, while checking the storage room, I felt an icy draft that seemed to cut through my uniform. I glanced around, but there were no open windows or doors. The sudden and pronounced temperature drop left me shivering as I completed my inspection. Later that week, I was sitting at the security desk when I heard faint whispers from the hallway. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the sound of the building settling, but the whispers grew clearer and more distinct. I couldn't distinguish the words, but they sounded like murmured conversations. I decided to investigate, following the whispers down the corridor. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. As I reached the end of the hallway, the whispers abruptly stopped. I scanned the area with my flashlight, but the corridor was empty. It was as if the sounds had vanished into thin air. I also noticed cold spots in various parts of the building that night. While inspecting the hallway near the patient rooms, I felt a sudden chill that fogged my breath. The temperature seemed to fluctuate erratically, with pockets of freezing air appearing and disappearing without warning. I couldn't deny that these occurrences were getting more bizarre. Determined to find an explanation, I began keeping a log of all the strange events. I documented each occurrence's times, locations, and details, hoping to identify a pattern or cause. One evening, while reviewing my notes, I noticed something troubling. The strange events seemed to coincide with my shifts. Each time I'd witnessed something out of the ordinary, it was during the same hours and often in the same areas of the building. I decided to take a more proactive approach. I started to set up motion detectors and additional cameras in areas where the disturbances were most frequent. I hoped that capturing concrete evidence would provide a rational explanation, or at least make tracking the source of these disturbances easier. The night I installed the new cameras, I felt an eerie anticipation. I checked and double-checked the equipment, making sure everything was functioning correctly. As I monitored the feed from the cameras, I was on high alert for any signs of activity. Hours passed and everything seemed normal until the early morning hours. I noticed on the camera feed that one of the storage rooms appeared empty, yet the door slowly creaked open. I watched in disbelief as the door swung wider, revealing an empty room. Suddenly, the camera footage showed a shadowy figure moving across the floor. The figure seemed to drift through the room, disappearing and reappearing as if it were made of smoke. My heart raced as I watched the footage, the shadow moving closer to the spot where I had seen the patient. The sight was both terrifying and fascinating. I knew I had to confront this phenomenon head-on. I reviewed the footage repeatedly, hoping for a different explanation, but the shadow remained a chilling mystery. As the night wore on, the sense of unease grew stronger. I was no closer to understanding the nature of the disturbances, but I was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. The shadowy figure and the cold spots seemed to be more than mere coincidences. They were a part of a larger, more sinister puzzle I needed to solve. The clock ticked slowly, and I felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on me. I knew that the answers I sought were somewhere in the darkness of the rehabilitation center, and I was prepared to find them, no matter how unsettling the journey might be. The night seemed to stretch endlessly as I continued to investigate the strange occurrence of the previous shift. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and dread. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, the vacant eyes of the new patient and the unsettling whispers. It didn't help that my colleagues were clueless about his existence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Determined to find an explanation, I returned to the room where I had seen the mysterious patient. The sterile environment of the rehabilitation center seemed colder tonight, and the shadows in the dimly lit hallways appeared more pronounced. I entered the room, which was now empty and untouched. I had hoped for some clue, but it was as the day before, neatly arranged and lifeless. I began by checking every corner, lifting furniture, and scrutinizing the floor for any signs of disturbance. I noticed an old filing cabinet in the corner as I examined the room. A pile of discarded medical supplies partially obscured it. I pulled the cabinet out and began rummaging through the files. Most were outdated and irrelevant, but one folder caught my attention. It was labeled Patient Records, Confidential. With a sense of urgency, I opened the folder. Inside were documents and reports that detailed various patient histories. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. None of the names matched the description of the patient I had seen. A small, yellowed envelope slipped between the pages as I was about to close the folder. The envelope was addressed to the head of the center and dated several years ago. I carefully opened it, revealing a letter inside. The letter was typed and unsigned, but the contents made my blood cold. It described a patient who had undergone experimental treatments, resulting in severe psychological and physical changes. The final paragraph mentioned that the patient had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and the letter warned of an entity that might still linger in the facility. As I read the letter, a chilling realization dawned on me. The description matched the eerie patient I had seen, hollow eyes, whispering to himself, and an overall sense of dread. This was no ordinary patient. He was a remnant of something far darker. The letter implied that the center had buried the truth, likely to protect its reputation. I needed to confront someone about this. I decided to speak with Dr. Mitchell, the head of the center. I found him in his office, busy with paperwork. I approached him with the envelope and the letter, my voice wavering. "Dr. Mitchell, I need to talk to you about something important." "I found this in the old records," I said, handing him the envelope. He took the envelope and skimmed through the letter. His expression changed from curiosity to a guarded seriousness. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and unease. "I see you found something that wasn't meant to be uncovered," he said quietly. "There's more to this facility's history than most people know. The patient you saw was part of an experiment that went wrong. We've tried to move past it and protect the patients from knowing the full extent of what happened." His admission left me stunned. The shadows in the corners of the facility seemed to deepen as the truth came to light. Dr. Mitchell explained that the experiment involved altering patients' mental states, and the resulting trauma had led to some patients becoming almost like spectral remnants, trapped between worlds. "Why keep it secret?" I asked, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "We hoped that keeping it quiet would prevent fear and maintain the center's reputation." But clearly that decision was a mistake, he replied. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. The entity I had encountered was a figment of my imagination and a tragic consequence of the experiments conducted in this building. I was now entangled in a grim piece of the center's hidden history. Dr. Mitchell agreed to help me investigate further, promising to provide more information and access to restricted areas where the full extent of the experiments had taken place. I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread as I left his office. The shadows in the hallway seemed to pulse with a new intensity, and the whispers I'd heard before now felt like a mournful chorus echoing the sorrows of the past. The truth had been revealed, but it was clear that the story was far from over. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread as I walked through the dimly lit halls of the rehabilitation center. The sight of the new patient's empty room from the security footage still haunted me. Despite the reassuring conversations with my colleagues, who all claimed ignorance of the patient's existence, I was certain I had seen him. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The next night I was on edge. Every creak of the old building and every flicker of the fluorescent lights seemed amplified. The empty room where I had seen the patient was now locked, and I had no reason to believe anything unusual would happen, but the sense of unease lingered. As I patrolled the halls, I kept glancing back toward the room. The unsettling whispering I had heard the night before still echoed in my mind. I decided to investigate further. I needed tangible evidence to explain what I had seen or heard. I returned to the scene of the mysterious encounter, carefully unlocking the door and stepping inside. The room was clean, orderly and empty as I had left it. I examined every corner, searching for clues that might explain the apparition. The walls were bare, with no hidden compartments or secret passages. It seemed like an ordinary room. Then, I noticed something peculiar. Under the bed there was a small, old notebook. It looked out of place, and I hesitated before picking it up. The notebook was worn and dusty, with pages that had yellowed over time. I flipped through the pages, finding what seemed to be journal entries written in a shaky hand. The entries detailed the experiences of a man named Richard Holloway, who had been a patient at the center many years ago. His writings spoke of a deep sense of isolation and paranoia. Richard described seeing a figure in the shadows, someone who would appear and disappear without a trace. He mentioned feeling like he was being watched constantly and hearing whispers that drove him to the brink of madness. The last entry was the most disturbing. Richard wrote about a new patient being brought to the center, someone not listed in the records who seemed to share his torment. The entry ended abruptly with a chilling note. "I see him now. He's here with me." The connection between Richard's experiences and the shadowy figure I had encountered was undeniable. It seemed that the patient I had seen was a figment of my imagination and a manifestation of Richard's haunting presence. The notebook revealed that Richard's spirit, or perhaps something darker, still lingered in the center, tormenting those who wandered into his old room. I decided to delve deeper into the center's history. After some research, I discovered that Richard Holloway had been one of several patients who had mysteriously vanished or died under unexplained circumstances. Clearly, something dark and unresolved was tied to the center's past. Determined to end the haunting, I sought the help of a local historian with extensive knowledge of the center's history. Together, we discovered that the center had been built on land with a tragic history, including disappearances and unexplained deaths. Armed with this new knowledge, I returned to the room. I performed a small ritual to appease any lingering spirits, hoping to offer some form of closure. I spoke softly, acknowledging Richard's suffering and asking for peace for him and the center. As I finished the ritual, the oppressive atmosphere in the room seemed to lift. The cold spots and eerie whispers faded away. It was as though a heavy weight had been lifted from the center. The room felt calm and still, no longer a place of torment. The next day, I checked the security footage once more. The room was empty, just as it should be. The feeling of being watched was gone, and the center seemed to have returned to normal. The mystery of the phantom patient had been solved, but the experience left me with a profound sense of respect for the unresolved traumas that can linger long after the individual's physical presence has vanished. The old warehouse was no longer just a building. It was a reminder of the past and the echoes of those who once walked its halls.